I would like to start by Gordon Allport's 5 stages of prejudice. Now, I'll explain why I'm starting with this later on. However, I just wanted to go through this quick 5 stage of prejudice, which I do with all my classes, just to bring home to the idea of how such prejudice that we hold can cause some disruption within class, within our lives, and within everywhere we follow. So let's start with the 5 as a whole. First thing is speech, talking about a person or group behind their back. Avoidance, distancing themselves of disliked group or members. Discrimination, excluding all members of that group and segregating yourselves or segregating themselves. Then comes physical attack. Prejudice may lead to acts of violence or semi-violence. Now, this could be emotional as well. I mean, I will go through that in detail later on. And then extermination, violent expression of prejudice. Now, this is obviously quite extreme. Gordon Allport looked at the Holocaust and World War II, what have you, and then he basically came out with these psychological changes. But we see these even today, we see these every day, and how such things, small as speech about a person behind their back, can cause such, or can create such a massive impact, such as physical attack or extermination itself. Now let's go into speech. Now, speech is a negative or verbal remarks against the person, group or community, which are not addressed directly to the target or the person. Generally referred to as talking behind someone's back, where someone says, "Oh, I hate the way he or she speaks," and then all of a sudden you'd whisper something in someone else's ear, and then it starts causing a person's psychological view within the cognitive mind of the other person who's receiving it. Then comes avoidance. Obviously, when someone's telling you about something, then you start avoiding that specific individual. At this level, people seek to avoid the group or individual who have been stereotyped, like speech. This seems harmless at the beginning. One has the right to choose one's friends, I agree, and choosing not to be friends with a particular group or people does not seem so awful. But the trouble is that lack of contact and friendship with a group or person leads to ignorance about them, or about the way they are, the way they behave. And ignorance in turn leads to stereotyping, fear and prejudice. Okay? And then comes acts of discrimination, where the group start talking about the person behind their back, start laughing at them, and the unwanted group or individual is now kept out of some social circles. Gordon Allport basically went on to neighbourhoods, shopping areas, social clubs, schools, churches, gatherings, places, what have you. But in the context of our classes, we'll talk about social circles more. There are unwritten laws that are enacted to enforce such discrimination, i.e. we don't allow such people within our group, blah blah blah. Yes, you may not say that out loud, but the general consensus is quite interesting how that does happen within groups. And you may have noticed this yourselves, something may bring home to some of your own experiences throughout your lives that's happened. And then Gordon Allport put as physical attack. Within Gordon Allport's results, he went on to gang warfare resulting from prejudice, or take the form of defacing buildings or places of worship. And we don't have to go that far to see where physical attack actually comes from. I mean, look at football hooliganism, for example. My team, your team, blah blah blah, and that's a perfect example of how this in turn becomes a physical attack. Now, the key thing here is this physical attack doesn't have to be in the form of physical violence. It can also be in the form of emotional or psychological harm. And that alone is assault, physical assault, because it's causing a psychological harm to that person, and as a result, an emotional harm. Okay? Then, just to finalise it off, basically Gordon Allport went on to extinction. The final step escalates from murder to genocide, which obviously he was actually looking into the genocide of the Jewish community. In the context that we're looking at, what I'd like to highlight is that during World War II, the masses followed Hitler because of these gradual steps of prejudice where people became conditioned to believe it be true. Now, the Nazis were not Nazis because they were totally towards the Hitler's type of frame of mindset. No, they were actually very, well respected people, and they were conditioned to become that way inclined simply because they were just following these 5 steps, and gradually, before they knew it, they were conditioned to follow, and they were known as Nazis. Why do we start with this? It's basically just to give you a quick insight into how our minds work and how prejudice works. Now, your classmates are a great way to practice these principles of working together as a team. Make an effort to meet up, work together and help each other out. Some people you will not get along with, which is understandable, and some people you will. But if you both try to get along with each other, then there is a mediocre where you are actually coming for a purpose. It's just 3 weeks, guys. We've passed the first week, and please keep this in mind when working together in current state and in the future as well. Okay, let's get on to our class now. What is CBT? Now, we basically did cover in class, I think, therefore I am. René Descartes put it quite well. And now we'll go into what CBT is. And as you can see, it's a psychotherapeutic treatment that helps patients to understand the thoughts and feelings that influence behaviours. Psychotherapy, we confirmed in class, was the fact that the treatment of mental disorder by psychological rather than medical means. Now then, there was the CBT triangle. Now, as you can see, there was what we think affects how we feel and act, therefore thought is the first part. And then comes the fact of what we feel affects what we do. So the emotional side came in. And then what we do as a result, think and feel, comes out in our behaviour. And this is therefore the CBT triangle. Now, what does CBT treat? Now, CBT is commonly used to treat a wide range of disorders, such as phobias, anxiety, which is another one. And then you have ADHD, and then you have the addiction, and then you have depression. Now, the key thing here is to realise, when I go into the history of CBT, where curing depression within CBT had excelled, and therefore is widely recognised to be a great success in curing depression. It is short term and focused on dealing with a specific problem. Then a brief history into CBT. Now, in the 1960s, Aaron T. Beck, a medical doctor, then an assistant professor in psychiatry at the University of Pennsylvania, fully trained and practicing psychoanalyst. So he was following Sigmund Freud's psychoanalysis at that time. He was a scientist at heart and believed that in order for psychoanalysts to be accepted by the medical community, he believed that the theories that Sigmund Freud came out with needed to be demonstrated and was empirically valid. So in the late 1950s and early 1960s, he embarked on a series of experiments that he fully expected would produce such validation, but instead the opposite occurred, which shocked him. The results of Dr. Beck's experiments led him to search for other explanations on curing depression. So he identified distorted negative cognition or thoughts and beliefs, and as a primary feature of curing depression, he developed a short-term treatment, one of whose primary targets were reality testing patients with depressed way of thinking. So CBT was mainly formed to cure such depression, and he obviously used Sigmund Freud's and Alfred Adler's psychoanalyst theory. Thereafter, CBT was, I suppose, tweaked by the social cognitive therapist Albert Bandura and the behaviorist Joseph Wolfe, and they basically chose the ideas of developmental psychologists and behavioral psychologists. You're probably all familiar with John B. Watson, Ivan Pavlov, B.F. Skinner, Jean Piaget, and all these personalities who are well known today within the area of behaviorism and developmental psychology. So then what happened? Then basically these things formed a specific therapeutic outcome, which was then known as CBT. However, there is one other, Albert Ellis, for rational emotive behavioral therapy. And the reason why this was quite important within the CBT factor was because that improved the other aspect of CBT, where any emotional behavioral areas were then developed. I don't want to go into it so much because we're going to be covering it during the course, but this forms a brief history into CBT. Okay. Now, the advantages of CBT work as well as medication. The plus point is it's obviously got no side effects. The patients can use CBT skills upon themselves at any time, place or situation, and it is directed and targeted as a treatment in most cases. Now, because it's so short term, it saves money and time. It's versatile and can help using books, videos, Skype with various groups. So it's very versatile as a therapy. And then you can add other breakthrough therapies, i.e. sort of NLP, hypnosis, meditation, Zen, etc. So you can use all these, and you can use various avenues to treat patients as well. I myself use Skype and Zoom quite often, and group therapy is one of the key factors that I like to use as well. And I'll be honest, within our classroom, you'll realise that more than lecturing, it's almost like a group therapeutic session. And that's the way I like to use the class as well, so you get a good insight into it. However, there's disadvantages. Now, the disadvantages requires the patient to be actively involved, which is often not expected by most patients who go on to seek CBT treatment. Some treatments require fear confrontation, which is true, and it fails to address family issues, albeit it depends on the therapist. Now, I've had a lot of cases where the family's been interviewed as well as the actual client. Therefore, the family's in on how to treat them. Okay, and also it only addresses the here and now issues. But this is all changing as well with the new therapies that are coming into play and helping CBT expand its horizons. Okay. Okay, so what are the different approaches to CBT? Now, CBT, there are three main prongs of CBT. The first one being cognitive therapy, the second one being multimodal therapy, which we'll cover in class, and the third one being rational emotive therapy. That's how much of an impact the last one made within the history that I spoke about. How our thoughts create our moods, again to sum up, and discovering that we all have tendencies to negative thoughts and that cause unhappy feelings, especially in response to particular stresses. Stresses meaning anchors meaning specific situations that we are put in that remind us of specific negative instances that happened within our lives, i.e. phobias, PTSD, depression, anything that triggers these stresses. Once we accept the fact that we can learn to spot these negative thoughts as they arise and then challenge and rethink them, we can basically overcome them. Okay,